Today we are talking all about Mormon dating culture, and for this conversation I decided to bring my partner in crime, Jackson, who also experienced Mormon dating culture because we ended up getting married due to Mormon.
I dated at least one Mormon.
Here we are. So we're going to start the video. I have a list of Mormon dating slang. And Jackson was a bit of a dating expert too. So I think we both were dating experts. So we're going to start with a quiz. I'm going to see how much Mormon dating slang Jackson remembers.
So brew up yourself some devil's bean brew and buckle in.
Cheers. Quick note that Mormons also use a lot of the typical slang you might hear, like bussin' or tea, but there's also a lot of very Mormon-specific slang. Upon my research, I did realize that some of this Mormon dating slang is kind of part of broader Christian dating slang. We have 11 questions, so we're doing we're gonna see your score.
Okay. All right.
All right. What is a Dear John?
Dear John is a letter that a missionary gets breaking up with him.
And what's the female version that a girl would get?
Dear Jane?
Yeah, Dear Jane. That was a bonus point.
Okay.
Okay, what is a cow?
Cow is crush of the week, and I think that's a EFY thing. I never did that.
What's EFY?
Especially for youth. It is a Mormon like youth camp for high school kids.
And if you can have a cow, what's a cod?
Crush of the day?
Yes. Okay. So far you're 2 for 2. What is a Provo All-Star?
A Provo All-Star is a bro, typically a bro, who has peaked in Provo, which is a sad state at BYU. Usually these gentlemen wear long basketball shorts and have like Vivint, the company Vivint has a lanyard for Vivint hanging down the side of their pants, and usually a flat brim cap on backwards. And yeah, it's like the epitome of Mormon bro.
Were you ever a Provo All-Star?
I barely went to BYU, so I wasn't qualified to be a Provo All-Star. Oh, I did have a Vivint lanyard for a while.
Halfway there.
That's half the battle.
I'll also add, in my experience, Provo All-Star was a guy who was over 30, or maybe over more like 25.
Okay.
So it's a little bit more like he's creeping around for the young college girls, because he's still trying to get married.
Okay.
So he's graduated. That's why it's the All-Star thing, because it's like he's graduated, but he didn't leave Provo. So he's still hanging around Provo till he can catch his wife, and then he'll leave.
It's been like over a decade, so maybe.
You also, like you said.
Yeah, barely went to BYU.
Okay, I'll give you the point.
Oh, that's generous of you. Thank you.
What's a ring by spring?
I've never heard this, but I'm assuming that it's you show up at school and you're wanting to get married on the quick, and so you're on a sprint to get a ring by spring. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
I've never heard that term before. That sounds like that's the ladies talking.
No, it's kind of more recent, I think, in the last few years. Because we got married. We just celebrated our 9-year anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
You too. And so some of our dating knowledge is we're basically elderly at this point within Mormon dating culture. So some of this is prehistoric knowledge.
It's dated.
Okay. Don't look at the...
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see anything.
Okay. Yeah, so ring by spring, you're trying to get married as quickly as possible. Specifically, it seems also to apply to people who are trying to get married before graduation, because once you graduate from BYU, you are kicked out of the primary dating pool. So
You're a Provo All-Star.
Then if you don't get the ring by spring, you're a Provo All-Star. What is a sweet spirit?
It's an ugly girl. There's no other way to put it. If you're a sweet spirit, it's a way of indicating. I think it comes from probably your mom, who's really nice in Relief Society, saying of a girl who hasn't got to, oh, she's a sweet spirit. But it ends up getting kind of adopted by everyone. In fact, I think there's like a Mormon song about it. It's me.
Can you sing a few lines for us?
You know, let's see. Sweet spirit, you're so nice. What's the next
Oh,
line?
sweet spirit, you're so nice.
Nice.
I'll link it below. But my favorite line is that you're only getting married if we bring back polygamy.
Second wife material. It's
Which is
real
a
sad.
real modern, like it's a real modern song, made within the last few decades or something. So they know about polygamy. Don't let them fool you. Yeah, sweet spirit was always really a really horrible and mean thing to say. But also, I feel like it would get like used referentially by girls themselves. Should they be like, I'm just a sweet spirit. I just am gonna have to bring brownies to dudes till they open their stomachs first and then their hearts to me. Also, bringing goodies was a huge part of. We're gonna get into that.
Yeah, maybe tell the story.
Okay, next question is, what is mission goggles?
So you've heard of beer goggles, right? You get a few drinks in, and all of a sudden everyone gets hotter. It's a little like that, but for your mission. You've been out in the mission field, as they call it, for a while now. You haven't been on the dating scene. You're getting extra thirsty, and everyone gets hot.
Yeah, so on your mission, you can't hug. You cannot. Missionaries are ultra shamed if they ever experience self pleasure. We'll call it for the sake of YouTube. You can't. You can. The most you can do dating wise is you can write letters home. So a lot of people, thirsty is a great word for it, because for men, 2 years no dating. For girls, year and a half, no dating, no touching. Nada. So mission goggles is a real problem. All right, this is a big one. I think a lot of people know. So far, you're doing great.
Okay.
What is a NICMO?
NICMO.
Oh, do you not know this one?
Non-committal makeout.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never used that one. I'd heard that one used. I've never used the...
The funny thing about NICMO is that normal people have NICMOs. It's just hookup culture, because you just full on hook up with people. You have one night stand. So a NICMO is the hookup culture version for Mormons. Did you ever do a NICMO?
A NICMO?
I was the only girl Jackson ever saw in real life. I'm the only woman that's ever existed.
It's true.
As we'll see with these stories.
No. I mean, I guess in high school, maybe, but like, I never would refer to it as a NICMO. It's just something that happened.
A NICMO is something that happens to you. I'm just kidding.
You happen upon. I don't think that I think that it sounds like Mormons really are like, let's get together and have a NICMO. And that's like so weird and inorganic.
No, I think it's more like you tell your
bizarre.
friends, like, oh, he's my NICMO buddy, or I think it was more of a NICMO situation. Like, it's more you use it when discussing a guy.
It's just such a weird...
You wouldn't use it like, would you like to NICMO?
I don't know what they're up to. I hear that they have people jumping on the bed for them. Like, I don't know what's going on at that university, if you can call it that. The Lord's University? Come on.
That's very funny. I shouldn't drink my coffee. Spit my coffee out. All right, what is a DTR?
Define the relationship. As in, is this a NICMO situation, or are we celestial partners?
Correct. Yes, a DTR is... I think that's one that I definitely saw in broader Christianity, in religiosity in general, because there's a lot of, are we just hanging out, or is this a marriage situation?
Which might be a healthy conversation for anyone to have, honestly. If you're dating,
just not in the first 2 or 3 dates. So we're on word number 9. What is mutual?
Mutual. Mutual is short for the Mutual Improvement Society, I think, or association. And it is a youth program for young men and young women. Oh, the dating app?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a dating app called Mutual for Mormons. But yeah.
Yes. So lots of members now meet on Mutual, because it's like Tinder for Mormons.
Which is named after
Mutual, which is the Wednesday night youth activities.
Yes. That's what I thought you meant.
Yeah.
Meet people to
But
date there
you
too.
knew the other one. What does it mean to be waiting for your RM?
To be waiting for your return missionary. Although it seems like a misnomer. Surely you're waiting for your missionary who will be an RM by the time they get back. But yeah, yes.
Okay, yeah. So a lot of girls, if you ask them on dates as a guy, they'll say, "Sorry, I'm waiting for my missionary," or "I'm waiting for my
They're
RM."
not. They just don't want to go on a date with you. None of them are
Yeah,
really waiting. It's a lie.
it is used sometimes as a way to get out of dating. I knew girls also who would wear fake wedding rings whenever they would walk onto BYU campus because they would get asked on so many dates that they would
Oh
literally
my
they would wear
gosh.
fake wedding rings so that they could just make it to class unaccosted.
Wow, that sounds like a hassle. Sorry, ladies.
So yeah, a lot of girls will form an emotional attachment to some guy before he goes on his mission. So that means she essentially doesn't date for 2 years while he's on his mission. And a lot of times when the guy comes back, they break up. So what a waste. All right, last question. What does it mean to fill your canteen?
Filling your canteen, you're about to cross a long and thirsty desert, like a mission, for example. Is kind of saying, hey, this is my last chance. This is my last opportunity to drink the sweet waters of BYU before I take off.
Yeah, so a man may, or a girl, boy, man or a woman, may endeavor to collect as many NICMOs as possible in an attempt to fill their canteen before their dry spell. Now that we finished our quiz, great work, we are going to move into discussing more about the specifics of dating culture. So this video will have 3 parts, essentially pre-18 dating, so dating before you're 18, crushes in middle school, dating in high school. Then we're going to discuss 18 to about 25 or 30, which is where most members get married and you're dating in earnest, looking for your eternal companion to marry in the temple. And then the third part will be people who don't fit this perfect structure of dating that the church sets up. This might be people who are LGBT. This might be people who are older than 30, who now most of their peers are married. This might be people who are non-Mormon and live in Utah and have to experience Mormon dating culture. So those are our 3 parts today. Let's jump into what it's like to date prior to turning 18.
You came from a very strict family. So what was it like for you?
Yeah, so we followed the rules really exactly. There's something called the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet, and this is a picture of what it looks like, and I'll link it below. And they've had multiple versions. So in the For the Strength of Youth pamphlets in the 1960s and 70s, it was very, very strict and a very thick rule book. So they've changed it to be a little bit more flexible over time. For my version of this For the Strength of Youth pamphlet, it said, no dating till you're 16, and then once you're from 16 to 18, you should really only go on group dates.
That was a pretty ironclad rule, I think, for like most of our childhood too. Like I think that was something that was, spoken
Very
from the pulpit
universal.
in general conference regularly.
So why don't you read, so if you see there, I have the 2011 version and the 2020 version, if you could read the 2.
Okay, this is just like in Sunday school. 2011 version. You should not date until you're at least 16 years old. 2022 version. For your emotional and spiritual development and safety, one-on-one activities should be postponed until you are mature. Age 16 is a good guideline.
So what do you notice in the difference?
Yeah, there's a lot more subtlety in 2022 is a guideline. 2011 felt like a commandment. I think that Mormons like to slice the onion really thin on what's doctrine versus what's policy, and we could talk about that all day. The ban on dating before you're 16 felt like a commandment.
I think you make a good point about scripture, doctrine. We know that this is Mormon scriptures that you carry around: Bible, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price. These are all scripture, but you're also basically told that the handbook is scripture, the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet is scripture because it's from the prophets. You could say really anything produced by the church manuals, anything said in general conference. These are all it's called living scripture. So it's very fluid. You can add to it. You can say that was scripture in the 50s, but now it's not scripture. So it's a kind of a strange way that Mormonism
Convenient.
is very convenient. I am surprised that they made it so that now 16 is just a guideline, because in my family, if you even admitted to crushes before 16, it was a full-on conversation about whoa, okay, you know, you can have a crush, but I remember if I would see someone I would have a crush on, I would like turn the other direction and never speak to them. And, you know, it was one of those things where I became very avoidant to any feelings of romance, because I was very intimidated by this commandment about the dangers of dating before you're 16.
Interesting. I was in the unfortunate position of discovering how strict my family was as I went. Like, I remember when I was 15 asking a girl to homecoming dance, and my dad was aware I was going to be doing this. And we're all excited, had made plans. She went out and got a dress. I was getting ready for this. And my dad came to me after the fact. He knew I'd asked her, he knew everything. And then he said, "Hey, son, you know, I've been thinking about this, and you're not supposed to date before you're 16. So you can't go to the homecoming dance." So I had to tell this girl, and understandably, she was really mad because I'd asked her and she'd said yes, and she'd gotten ready, and
So sorry.
yeah, it really sucked. It really sucked, and like he didn't come back right away and say you can't do it. He came back like weeks later, as we were getting like very close to the dance. So I think, although I didn't come from as strict of a family, and certainly there wasn't the kind of, it sounds like, intense conversations that you had, my dad would discover his conscience about some of these rules awfully late in the game, and so it was pretty frustrating.
That poor girl. I would be frustrated too.
Yeah, if you're seeing this, sorry about that.
Sorry from both of us.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, I think it really encourages either people just turning off that side of themselves, because, you know, I think people start getting crushes sometimes in elementary school, so that's a really long time to go with just saying, I don't experience attraction to anyone. And I think it encourages either people trying to turn it off, like in Book of Mormon musical, or just being really sneaky. So people would, you know, date. I knew some members of the church who sometimes what they would do is they would go on dates during lunch. So they'd meet up at lunch and they'd have a date. But, you know, it's almost like the same thing as kids changing into more revealing clothing once their parents drop them off because it's in their backpack. It just encourages kids to hide things from their parents because they want to have crushes and date people, but they know their parents will never allow it. And so it's actually more dangerous, in my opinion, because they just are sneaky about it. And if you're hiding things from your parents, you could get into trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being a sneaky little turd. I would, like, go to play basketball with Keith and instead go to the mall and hang out with a girl. Or I'd, like, say that I was go on a hike by myself and I would go meet up with someone there, and go on a hike together, or like ditch class, like things like that pretty regularly, because I'm trying to not like have my dad know, and I can't just hang out socially with a girl, even like a public place, right? Like it's if there's any way it could be construed as a date, I know that I could get in trouble for it.
Well, and things really make it back to your parents, because if anyone's a member of the church, they're gonna tell your parents. So even if your dad doesn't notice something, you lived in Utah, so sister so-and-so may see, I saw little Mary Jo and Jackson making eyes at each other at the mall, and she'll text, call, I guess, at that point, because texting wasn't a thing yet. But it's a very gossipy situation where you're kind of encouraged to rat on each other. Like the one time I went to my bishop when I was still in high school about being with a boy, and I was feeling guilty. It was not sex. Sounds like sex, but it was just very passionate kissing. And he literally, the bishop, first they make you describe it with a lot of detail. So I'm alone as a probably 16-year-old in a room with a man who is 65. he's asking me really specific questions, you know, how long, what did you do specifically? And then he also asked who it was. I had to give, and it was a Mormon boy. I had to give the Mormon boy's full name, and he said he was going to contact his bishop to call him into his office so he could also confess. So this whole ratting on each other, it really happens where once the word gets out, they're going to contact all these people who are involved. I always imagine when you're in confessional, it's basically anonymous, but that is not the case. If you're watching this and you're still a member of the church, never tell your bishop anything sensitive that you wouldn't want your entire ward to know, because there are no secrets that are going to be kept.
I feel like I got it doubly because my dad was a cop, and on more than one occasion, I would get ratted on doing something by some cop who saw me, or someone in the community who knew him who wasn't even in our ward, or maybe wasn't even Mormon. People would be like, oh, I saw Jackson, blah, 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 didn't line up with my story, and then I'd get in trouble.
So that's kind of pre-16 dating. We'll also get into steak dances, not steak like yummy steak like a stake in the ground. So we'll talk about that in a second, because that's also kind of rolled into all of this dating. But then just to explain, after you turn 16, from 16 to 18, you're still told you should only be doing group dates. So you're still not supposed to pair off, was the phrase that we always used. You're supposed to just go on as many group dates as possible, basically. So really, prior to 18, if you're truly following the rules, you would never have a true boyfriend or a true girlfriend. You would just either not date, or you would go on group dates where there's a ton of people around. You might not even hold hands with somebody or something, because that, you know, PDA and a group date is a little awkward. So let's discuss stake dances. So if you could explain, what is a stake dance?
Yes. So a stake is a collection of wards in a geographic area, and a ward is like a Mormon congregation. So it's basically a dance for the youth of a bunch of congregations. And usually it's held in like a church gym, usually at what's called the Stake Center, which is like an extra large church. And they bring everyone together, and usually they'll have like somebody DJing, and they'll turn the lights down and, you know, play some very church approved music, and everyone gets together and dances.
Or
And
we do a lot of what was the one that's to the right, to the right?
I can
the
hear
cha-cha
it.
slide.
I can hear it now. Yeah.
Sometimes they would play the cha-cha slide 3 times.
Yeah,
in a 2-hour dance.
And there were rules about, you know, kind of what you were supposed to do at these stake dances. You're supposed to wear a tie. I've gotten kicked out of stake dances for not wearing a tie on more than one occasion. You're supposed to have had an interview with your bishop before you go, so they make sure you're not going to go there and corrupt the youth. You're supposed to dance with like multiple different people. You're not supposed to pair off and dance with just one person the whole time. In some dances, they even had dance cards where you'd have someone like sign that they had danced with you, and you had to try and like get as many different people as possible to sign your dance card. It was a weird social dynamic, and I didn't care for them.
Were you the type of, because it's also almost, in my opinion, was approached by many as its own religious, like a meeting, like, yeah. Because there are so many guidelines to it, and you receive a ton of messaging around how to act at a dance. So as girls, and I saw this echoed in so many places online, girls were taught to always say yes to the first dance. And so if a guy comes to you and you asks, you want to dance for this dance, if you haven't danced with him during that dance, you really, really 100%, no questions asked, should say yes. That's your responsibility. And I use the word responsibility because that's how it was phrased to us girls, is that the boy took it upon himself to do the scary thing and ask you, and so you should say yes to be respectful and show, you know, and to be graceful and that kind of a thing. So there's a lot of cases where girls that I read online where girls would say yes to guys that were creepy, or in one case who had assaulted them, and they were still saying yes because that's what you're taught to do. And I think, in my opinion, it really sets up this precedent for the rest of Mormon dating, which is that the girl always feels very pressured into saying yes if a guy is pursuing her.
Yeah, it's a bad dynamic. Personally, I didn't care for stake dances that much. They always felt like really weird, contrived social settings. I think the only times I really went is if someone I knew specifically asked me. I'd go for a little bit and then leave. It was kind of a weird social situation.
I always spent a lot. I love steak dances. I think I like them because it was the only time I got to kind of experience, hanging out with the opposite sex in a way that was sanctioned.
Yeah.
And
You weren't sneaking out.
I wasn't doing any sneaking. So it was kind of, steak dances are typically once a month. So it was once a month for a few hours. I get to experience what it's like to interact with the opposite sex in a sanctioned way that doesn't feel like I should feel guilty about it. There's also dance cards. So Jackson talked about dance cards that he would sometimes use that people would fill their names out. But there's also something more formal called a dance card, same name, that the bishop has to give, which he mentioned, to show that you've received a special interview that allows you to go into the dance. So if you had a temple recommend to do baptisms for the dead, and I believe in my ward, if you had a temple recommend, you didn't have to do the special interview, or maybe you only had to do the special interview once a year to prove you're okay to go to the dance. But sometimes I would bring non-member friends to come to dances, and then they would have to go into a room and be interviewed by my bishop to make sure they weren't going to dirty dance or something. And I remember feeling so bad for my female friends who had to go sit in a room with my bishop and be asked, are you going to dance inappropriately? Will you keep a respectful space between you and your dance partner? And my non-member friends are probably like, look, I'm not from this cult, so this is not normal for me, and I am not enjoying this.
I remember one time I was visiting a friend in a different town, and they had a stake dance, and he was like, hey, come with me, let's go check this out. So I had to do that. I had to go because I wasn't from the stake. They didn't know me. They took me aside, gave me an interview, and I actually think the dance card is the same. I think it's the same thing that you have people sign. I actually think the bishop signs that you're okay to go in, and then you have your dance partner sign it. Anyway, I didn't have a tie. So he grabbed a tie out of like the lost and found bin in the stake center and gave it to me, and I put it on. And then I went out on the floor, and I wasn't even wearing like a collared shirt. It was literally just like, right? But I put it on my head and was dancing with it around my head, and they kicked me out for being too wild, too raucous.
That's hilarious.
It was pretty funny.
Yeah, I definitely never got kicked out of stake dance.
You weren't rowdy enough.
Yeah, I was not rowdy at all. Stake dances also are very cheesy. So when we get into talking about group dates, we'll talk about some of the very cheesy dates you do. It's almost like you're still just being little children. You're really like a little baby until you get married. So there's a lot of very cheesy activities. So at stake dances, they would try really hard to make everybody mix it up a lot because they don't want you to be pairing off. And so they do silly activities. Like a common one was to take your one of your shoes off and throw it in the center of the basketball court, and then everyone would throw their shoe in, and they'd go and check and be like, you didn't throw your shoe in the center, everybody has to throw their shoe in. And then the boys would go in and pick up a girl's shoe. So only the girls would throw their shoes in. The guys would go pick up a shoe, and then you'd walk around looking for who had the shoe, and then your partner would approach you and be like, I got your shoe, and then you put your shoe on and you dance.
Real keys in the fishbowl energy. I don't know about that. I never had to do that one.
Really, we did that all the time.
But maybe like I said, I didn't stay to the end of many dances.
But as a young kid, you're like, I hope a cute boy gets my shoe.
Charming gets my shoe. Yeah, it's like the what, Cinderella.
Yeah, exactly. There's also Mormon prom, which I never got to go to Mormon prom because I went to high school outside of Utah. But did you have Mormon prom?
They did have Mormon prom.
Okay.
I did not go to Mormon prom.
As we've established.
I know, bad Mormon. They had Mormon prom, though. Yes, that was a thing. And I think a lot of kids did both. It wasn't like it was scheduled to not conflict, at least in my area. So kids did both things, and it looked like it was good. It looked like it was like a lot of fun, actually. That looked like it was much better than a steak dance, from what I could tell.
Yeah, they usually put more effort into it, just like a typical prom. And I think it originated as an idea because prom can get so worldly. And some kids would be uncomfortable to go to prom. And so they were like, well, let's just have a very clean prom where there will be no songs with swearing and no grinding. And then also the modesty. So modesty was a huge part of steak dances too, because you'd have to get your shirt checked as a girl, no tank tops, of course. Your skirt or whatever you're wearing has to go to the knee. So there's a lot of modesty policing. Sounds like Jackson was being immodest with that tie on his head. Dirty whore. Just kidding. And so in my prom pictures, which I'll put here, I always have a little shrug because a sleeveless dress was definitely not allowed.
Modest is hottest.
Yeah. I didn't feel hot though. I felt awkward. And then you can't take it off the whole time. And I remember there would be Mormon girls who I would see would take off their little shrugs and would be wearing spaghetti straps. And I'd be like,
would you do that if Jesus
do you love
was here?
God or not? So there's steak dances, which gives you a little bit of an opportunity to meet members of the opposite sex. And then there's also group dating from 16 to 18. So some of the group dates that I wrote down, scavenger hunts were very popular. We'd go to the mall and it would say, find a blue shirt in the store, find something sticky, find food that's made with sugar, I don't know, some silly list like that. And then you'd go and you'd have your group date and then you'd go try to find your scavenger hunt list items. And I'm sure those malls were so annoyed that we'd show up and do that.
We had stores in Utah that had signs that said no scavenger hunts. That was actually like, some of the stores had no scavenger hunt rules because there were so many
That's so funny.
Group dates coming through, digging through their merchandise.
Like, please,
for the love of God, stop. Yeah, little activities like that were pretty fun, actually. I mean, I think like one thing you hear people complain about in socializing in like a worldly setting is how hard it is to find an activity other than like going and drinking, right? And there's something too, like Mormons good at coming up with creative things that are not drinking to get to know each other. Don't know if I'd recommend going and digging through the mall looking for scavenger hunt items. It's a little obnoxious to the mall, but there were some good little activities there.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for wholesome dating, especially at that age. I think it is kind of fun that you are almost, at BYU, I never went to a party with drinking. We'd be playing board games. We'd be playing get to know you games. Most of the times we wouldn't even watch movies because watching movies in a group setting is kind of discouraged because you're supposed to be getting to know each other. So I do think that in the digital age where I see so many people kind of, I can't figure out how to meet people other than dating apps, it was nice to have a kind of cheesy way to get to know members of the opposite sex, And
it's like at once really, really high stakes because there's so much like this is going to determine who you marry, but also like really low stakes because people go on so many dates that you can kind of move on if it's not, not for you.
Yeah. There's also other dates that were common. We had joint mutual activities. So it would be, for 16 to 18-year-olds, there would be some activity where we would pair off. We would often do, fancy dinner settings and you'd learn etiquette and you'd be on a date and, the guys would do one part of, maybe the guys would set the table and the girls would cook the meal. And so there's a lot of etiquette. There was also ballroom dancing was very common. So you'd learn a dance with your group, your date for the group for that night. And, hopefully as a girl, hopefully you got a good dancer.
I remember at one of those etiquette dinners, it was supposed to be random, but they split us into two lines that they had like around the corner from each other. And I saw the order of the girls' line. So I put myself in line in the right spot and ended up with the person I wanted to be with.
Sneaky.
We weren't like
Mormon
romantically
boys can't match your swagger because they're just like, I have to
follow
the
the
rules.
rules. Yeah, well, we weren't even like a romantic item. I wasn't like, but we were just friends. But I was like, of all these people, if I have to like have dinner with one of them, I want to hang out with my friend.
I remember that I had a devotional about, you're constantly being talked about. They have a lot of just conversations about dating. And at one devotional I went to, I think it was at EFY, he talked about how the reason you shouldn't pair off is that if you only ever try vanilla ice cream, how do you know you don't like chocolate? Or cookies and cream, or, and he was basically, that was his analogy of the reason why we have to do group dating and we can't pair off too soon, because you'll never know what you're interested in if you don't try all the flavors of ice cream. So I did think that all of the conversations around how important it is to be group dating were really interesting, because then once you hit 18, what does the conversation turn into?
Yeah, you're dating for marriage. All these metaphors, by the way, weird. Like if you're a girl and you're not virginal, then you are a licked cupcake, but we need to try all the ice cream? Like what is this?
Maybe just don't compare humans to food.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Humans
a
are
good
not food.
baseline.
Yeah.
On the topic of being pure, this is also where you start. Basically, I think starting at 12, you get a lot of conversations at church, especially for me as a girl, about being pure and about not having sex. And there's a video about how there's some people in a canoe, and they ask, how close can I get to the edge of the waterfall without going over? And the narrator is like, that's a dumb choice. You should stay as far from the waterfall as possible. So in that video, it says essentially that you should really only have physical affection in a way that you would be comfortable in front of your parents doing. So I don't know about you, but as a 16-year-old, I was not about to kiss anyone on the mouth in front of my parents. So that, and I'll link that video below, but it really makes you, I think, ultra uptight. You also get a lot of messages around no same-sex attraction behaviors. This is also the phase where there's a lot of homophobia, and it really sets you on the path of having, in my opinion, whether you're a girl, guy, whether you're straight, gay, you're just kind of screwed over a little bit by all these messages, and I think gay people get the most awful messages.
I remember Spencer W. Kimball in The Miracle of Forgiveness, which I think is discontinued now. Just shocking to me.
Let me get
it. Yeah, we have it here. Spencer W. Kimball in The Miracle of Forgiveness talks about how self-gratification will lead young men to homosexuality and standing around in circles gratifying themselves
with their
friends. Yeah, you just like stand around with your buddies. I don't know what kind of friends he had, but it wasn't relatable to me anyway. But yeah, there was some wild stuff. I think that was taught to people around that time. Around the time you're kind of a teen. Some real wild ideas about dating and sexuality.
Yeah, this is also the book where it says that if a girl is potentially going to lose her virtue against her will, which is rape, she should die trying to stop the attack rather than allow someone to take her virtue. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that all of the messaging, you have this kind of high-level messaging about, don't date till you're 16, group dating. That's all, I think that's all okay. It's a little silly and cheesy sometimes, but I guess whatever. But I think a lot of the messaging around purity and sexuality is very damaging, and it makes people do some weird stuff.
Yeah, and it gets watered down over time. But when you read like the unwatered down stuff that all of it is deriving from, like Spencer W. Kimball, it helps you to understand the worldview that's informing a lot of this.
Yeah, that's this book. I was asked to read this before I served my mission, so I read this entire book, and so as much as people will say, well, they don't have it as much, now it's less encouraged. They no longer sell it at Deseret Book. We are not that old, and we both read this book and referenced it quite a bit. So
I bought it in the missionary training center before I went out to Sweden on my mission. And when I arrived there, I was talking to my mission president about it, and he said it is a prophet of God preaching nothing but repentance, and it is the closest thing to Scripture we have that isn't in what's called the standard works. So that's like the Bible, Book of Mormon. This.
Yeah, and I think this idea that sex and sexuality only can exist within marriage and only can exist within another person, you can only experience sexual feelings when you're in a heterosexual marriage, and that's the only realm in which these feelings are allowed. I do think that it makes people really have such large levels of repression, and then when they do finally get married, they have repressed that feeling so hard that it feels really dirty, especially for women, I think. And so when you finally do get you have permission to be a sexual being and to be a human being, you've programmed yourself so carefully to not want any of those things that it's very difficult, I think, for many people to suddenly make a ton of babies. Which brings us to our next phase, which is what it looks like to date once you turn 18. So at this phase, the men and women diverge a bit because there are different paths for both. So why don't you say or share what that looks like for men?
Sure. For men, it actually a little bit past 18, you kind of remain in this stage of not really dating for marriage, or you're not supposed to, because you have to serve a mission. And although it's not a commandment, it's definitely kind of a commandment. So I think for young men, it's expected that you're not really going to be dating in earnest until you come home from your mission.
Yeah, so boys and slash men are preparing to go. I would say some do still pair off around that time. They do still get girlfriends, and those are the girls who write them their whole mission. So I think that is still fairly common. I think 16 to 18, if you pair off, as long as he's a righteous boy, I think parents are kind of willing to look the other way, because it's like, some people get married at 18 right out the gate. So it is a little loosey-goosey around then, but you're just encouraged to continue group dates. So for girls, you would start dating totally in earnest. Girls can't serve a mission till they're 19. So you have at least, most people think that year exists purely because you're supposed to get married, and that's your main focus, rather than serving a mission. And boys, the mission is their main focus. So for girls, a lot of times it creates this, in my opinion, this power imbalance where when they go to college, girls are 18-year-old freshmen, but boys serve a mission first. So boys are freshmen when they're 20 years old. So there's already this imbalance where girls are coming straight out of high school and they're 18, and boys are coming off their mission to foreign countries, and they've had this 2-year experience of living by themselves or with their companion, and they've learned a lot, and they're very marriage hungry. They're, on a Mormon mission, they talk about getting married as soon as you get back constantly. So I think it creates this strange dynamic that doesn't exist in other colleges, where most colleges, freshmen, boys and girls, are 18, but at BYU, Idaho, church schools, girls are 18 and the boys are 20.
I'm curious how the dynamic has changed, and maybe leave a comment if you've gone through this more recently. Since more women are serving missions, the age requirements for women and girls to serve missions have come down. There was a big push for a while for more girls to serve missions. I'm curious if that has changed the dynamic at all, since I do think there's probably more girls going on missions these days.
Yeah, I'm guessing that I think even statistically the average age of marriage has gone up. But I do still think that because you're so programmed as a girl and then a woman to get married as soon as possible,
yeah,
there is, I think it probably depends on the individual. I think some girls are like, I want to go on a mission, and then a lot of women choose not to. So I think it really just depends on the individual, but I do think that they build in that gap year so that more women / girls, that's when they're becoming adults, are choosing to think about at least getting married.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be set up to encourage women to get married. I think one thing I will say is this doctrine that really, really emphasizes the importance of getting married leads people to do things like, I'll speak to my own experience. I had been dating a girl before I went on my mission, and we've already established I didn't follow like the prescribed path exactly. So I was pretty sure I wanted to marry this girl. And so we decided, oh, she's going to wait for me. I'm going to go off my mission. It'll be great. We'll come back.
She even had a ring.
Yeah, she even had a ring. Yeah, yeah. A little like
bitch.
promise ring. But I think that it creates a really weird dynamic because you're going off for 2 years. Like, can you really expect that this person's going to like wait for you? Can you really expect that like it's all going to be the same when you come back, that like things aren't going to change? I think that the expectation is unrealistic and weird, and it ends up creating like if you're a Mormon kid and you're watching this, you're getting ready to go on a mission. First off, what are you doing watching Alyssa Grenfell videos? But if you are and you still go through with going on a mission, don't go with someone waiting for you, because they're probably not going to wait, even if they tell you they are the whole time. They're probably not really, at least not the way you think. But also, you're going to come back, and you're going to be very different people. And this expectation that like, oh, we're going to get married and everything's going to be great, is likely not to line up. And you're probably better off starting from scratch after this really formative experience at a really formative time in your life, because you're going to come back and you say, oh, learn some things about what I actually want, what I can actually live with. We've probably both changed as people. So generally speaking, I think it's a bad idea, but it is a natural outgrowth of this very kind of marriage-centric culture that if you have met someone and it makes sense, you're like, well, we're basically married already. But like, you're not. You're really not.
Yeah, and I think from the female side of things, I knew girls who would be at college, but they met some guy in high school, they're waiting for him on his mission, and they would just sit in their room and listen to sad romantic music and would write in their journal, and they'd be like waiting by the post off, waiting by the, what's it called? Waiting by the mailbox for the letter to come from their missionary. And it would be 2 years of just this. It reminds me of romances that are in the military and like the, wars of the past, where the women are writing their soldier, are you okay, Danny? And the girl is just waiting by the phone. And then also the relationship, in my opinion, becomes a bit of a fantasy because you're not really talking to them. You're not getting to know them. You're just building them up in your head, like, oh, they're my prince, they're not my knight in shining armor. And then time and time again, I saw the boy would come home and they would break up. And it was like she waited for 2 years crying in her dorm room, only for the guy to, maybe both of them decide to just be like, wow, that we dated in high school and now we're 20. This isn't really working. And both parties are just frustrated for kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's a weird cultural outgrowth of this whole mission thing and the extreme marriage focused, and it's a bad idea.
Well, speaking of marriage, what is the fastest you ever saw people get engaged and then get married?
Oh, there were some that just absolutely gave me whiplash. The fastest, maybe like 2 months.
2 months to marriage?
2 months to engaged.
Oh, okay.
To marriage, I don't know. It usually take a little longer than that. But I saw some very, very fast engagements.
At BYU, I saw multiple engagements in 2 weeks.
Whoa!
But the thing is, it's bragging rights. Because it basically, I feel like people would almost use it as, look at how in tune with the spirit we are.
Yeah.
We've received revelation that we're meant to be together. Often it would be the girl saying, I knew a girl who literally said he received a revelation that I'm supposed to marry him. And so I feel, and I prayed about it. I feel good about it too. So we're married and then, or we're getting engaged. So the fastest marriage I saw, so from meeting till marriage, was about 2 months, which is why I asked. So it's like,
wow,
meeting to engaged, 2 weeks. And then from engaged to wedding is a month or two.
I guess if the old revelation trick worked for Joseph Smith, That's crazy.
Yeah.
2 weeks.
And it's just 0 to 100. I mean, imagine going from throwing your shoe in the center of a basketball court to suddenly you're doing the patriarchal grip and in the temple with your veil on, and you're like, yes, we will be married for time and all eternity. I'm excited to finally get to know you.
You can almost see you're on the American frontier. You're heading off to, I don't know, like the deserts around Kanab or some godforsaken place in the 1800s, and you like, meet some lady at a steak dance in Salt Lake before you take off on the last wagon into the middle of the desert. Maybe 2 weeks is enough. You don't want to go do that alone, and you'll figure it out through all the trials and travails. It feels a little outdated today, though. We're not all going to die at 35. Like, no rush.
We got the time. Yeah. And I think to some extent it is, people want to have sex and people want to just, I think
Thirsty.
Once you're an adult, you naturally probably do want to move to the next level. And the only way you can do that is by getting married. And there's even all these Mormon myths about BYU students driving to Vegas in the middle of the night and getting married, having sex, and then getting divorced. So that they, that's the bed shaking myth as well. Myth, I think it is probably real, but it's just creates a very strange and unhealthy culture where people are doing all of these very strange mental acrobatics in order to just engage in typical human behavior.
Yeah, I will say I think it seems like a good development, as much as it's like a little annoying to me as a former Mormon. It seems like a good development that there are more active Mormons saying, hey, I can live my life the way I want. I can not follow every commandment and still be a Mormon. I can drink coffee or dress immodestly or, date who and how I want and still be a Mormon. It does feel like a little bit disingenuous, I think, for people like us who grew up at maybe a little bit of a stricter time in the church. But in as much as that's true and people feel like they could be Mormon and not have to strictly hew to every rule, it's probably healthier. It probably leads to better outcomes for people who stay in the church in terms of their life trajectory.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad that they're starting to use the word guideline more rather than commandment, or I'm gonna in a bit get to the point where in the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet it also talks about homosexual behavior or same-sex attraction, and they've changed the language around that too to be softer. It's still homophobic, but at the very least it's a little softer. So I think that some of these changes, even though they can feel a little bit silly, or hey, I was told this was doctrine and now you just changed your mind about doctrine, it is in service, I think, of a healthier society in more a general sense. And if you, Jackson, could explain for our audience as well, what is behind the doctrine of searching for your eternal companion? Because most people, till death do you part, that's the end. Why is the concept of searching for an eternal companion brought up so often?
So in Mormon doctrine, families are forever. This isn't just kind of an arrangement that we come into in this earth life and then those arrangements are dissolved when you die. We would exist as a husband and wife and our children as our children for eternity, right? Basically, heaven is a big family tree. Because of that, whoever it is you marry, you better because you ain't never getting rid of them as long as you're both worthy and living up to your commandments or your covenants in the temple. So it's interesting because on the one hand that makes it like extra consequential. Like you marry the wrong person, that might be hell for eternity. But also there's this doctrine around this idea that like any worthy man and woman can make it work and could be married, and like it's almost your particular personal traits and idiosyncrasies and personalities aren't all that important. As long as you're living the church's program, you'll be happy and can have an eternal marriage. So it's like this weird duality where on the one hand, super consequential, you're with this person for eternity. On the other hand, like as long as you're all doing the church's doing it the church's way doesn't really matter who it is.
Yeah, the focus is more on eternal companionship and righteousness and less on compatibility. The number one thing is you're supposed to find someone that you can be sealed to for time and all eternity. They should be righteous. They should be a return missionary. They should have a calling. They should pay their tithing, temple recommend. Those are all righteousness index measures, and none of those are about, does he make you laugh?
You had a lot more righteous options than me. So why did you, a good Mormon girl, end up with me?
Well, I think it is kind of funny to realize because you actually did meet all the righteousness index measures. So even if, sometimes you were a little loosey-goosey with it, you did serve a mission, you did pay your tithing, you attended church every Sunday, you had a calling, and when we left the church, he was the elders quorum president. So I think that even though sometimes looking back we'll make jokes that you weren't as devout, and you certainly weren't as devout as me.
You should have been elders quorum president.
I should have been elders quorum president. But as far as, the grand spectrum of what it looks like to be Mormon, you still were doing all of the things. So
yeah, I think it probably bespeaks the fact that, like, you're not being, for those of you who don't know, elders quorum president is
he has to explain.
I have to explain
how important he was.
Elders quorum president is the head of the organization in a congregation of all men who have the Melchizedek priesthood who are not yet high priests, which is the next level, which basically means if you're a male under, say, late 30s to mid 40s, you're probably...
Would you say it's one level beneath a bishop?
Yeah, so a bishop is a high priest. Yeah, so it's like the bishop has the elders quorum president and the high priest group leader report up to him. And so it's kind of it's a layer of leadership in the ward. Anyway.
And women, where are women?
Well,
point to where women are.
Women are somewhere down here. Down here. Women have no priesthood or keys. All of that to say, it's considered to be like kind of an important role in a ward. And there were 1,000% guys in my elders quorum who were far more righteous than me. So either...
You were so humble, that's why you were...
So either righteousness isn't that much of like a criteria, or the bishop lacks discernment, which might be more accurate.
Yeah,
right?
Discernment being he can tell who's the most righteous and who deserves it the most. Yeah, I think that Mormon dating and Mormon relationships, temple marriages, it's very, you're a cog in the machine. As long as the parts are good parts, righteous Mormons, any two cogs can fit together as long as the cog is made properly. So it's more...
These cogs in a little factory?
Yeah. The cogs can fit together. And even in that quote, I wish I would have saved it here, but I'll put the quote below, but he basically says, any righteous man and woman can make it work as long as they are willing to pay the price. Which, when you think of lovely romance, you don't exactly think of your marriage as paying the price, but I do think that it's viewed as a calling. It's your responsibility to be married, it's your responsibility to make children. It's not something that you're entering into because it's been a dream of yours for a long time, not because you've just always wanted kids, you've always wanted to have a spouse. These are responsibilities that you have to God. You're not approaching, I think, finding a marriage necessarily in just romantic terms. It's your responsibility, which is, I think, why so many boys at stake dances would take asking girls to dance so seriously, because it's kind of their priesthood responsibility to ask a girl on a date and not, hey, I'm going to ask who I'm interested in. Rather, it's my duty to God to ask this girl to dance.
You're my favorite priesthood duty, for what it's worth.
Thank you. Jackson does still have the priesthood technically.
Which, if anyone at Church HQ is watching, you can send an excommunication letter anytime.
Yeah, I think another part of approaching dating with spirituality is how often, using words like, oh, I received a revelation that I should date you or that we should get married comes up. And I had a guy that before my mission, I had my mission call, and he said that he had received a revelation that I should not serve a mission and he had this dream that I should prove that I was committed to being a wife and mother because I was willing to not serve a mission and date him instead.
Wow. A theme in Mormonism is that revelation is always very convenient.
Oh my God. The number of times spiritual promptings and that's, I've talked a lot about how spiritual promptings led me down weird paths and paths that were bad for me. Imagine getting married to a guy because you very sincerely and naively believe that he's truthful when he says we're supposed to get married to each other, and then he turns out to be a total creep and you're just like really unhappy in your marriage. It's almost like if people know how to weaponize the language, they can really get their way pretty easily.
I want to state for the record that I never once told a girl that I had a revelation about what they should do. That always struck me as really weird. Sorry if you're a guy who's watching this who did that. It's just a weird thing to do.
It's very manipulative.
Which it's hard to say that a person doesn't believe that. Certainly you believe you have all kinds of revelations. I just think that, like, again, it's just awfully convenient if you have a revelation about how someone else's relationship in relation to you. Yeah, it's a weird thing.
But the patriarchy, which is that men receive revelation for women, really primes women to be very vulnerable and willing to hear messages like that, because if you've been taught your whole life that men have privy to the spirit and authority, specifically authority that you don't have, you're really primed that when a man comes to you and says stuff like that, you're like, maybe he's right because he has abilities beyond what I do. He has the priesthood.
Putting my Mormon apologist hat on, I will say that there's a kind of strict guidelines about who's supposed to be able to receive revelation for who. And in an unmarried couple, the guy shouldn't be receiving revelation for the girl. Just if you're faithful and you're watching this, there are rules. He can't receive revelation for you, even though Joseph Smith did that a lot. He was doing so as a prophet, not as a man.
That's a very good point. I also think there's a lot of people who, once they get married, so you have this long track record of trying to have Jesus as the throuple within your relationship and really obeying what God is asking you to do all the time. And I think another reason, because a question I get asked a lot is, why do people get married so young? Which we've kind of established, looking for your eternal companion, using the spirit, wanting to have an adult relationship. And then the other question is, why do people have kids so young and so many? Yep. And there's this doctrine of spirit babies in the pre-earth life. So here's a graph of what Mormons believe happens before we're born. There's all of these spirit babies in the pre-earth life who are knocking on heaven's door saying, I want to come down and get a body. So, and I want to come down to earth. And my family, we would talk about how my future children would be watching me as a child from heaven and would be waiting to come down and be my child. So you
had such an intense childhood. Oh my God.
So you're imagining, you literally are picturing there are babies in heaven watching, and they're begging me to procreate.
Wow.
And so that's why.
Watch that too?
Poor kids.
God.
And so to not have children is actually cruel, because your babies are waiting for you to have them. And by postponing having children, you are making it so they have to wait even longer. They've waited millennia for this. I think that's another reason, as a Mormon woman, you feel so much pressure to have children, because you've been taught to literally picture your children in the pre-earth life who are saying, Mommy, please get pregnant.
So something you told me when we were dating just made a lot more sense. Oh. Can I share? You may not even remember this. Tell me if you remember this.
I probably don't.
Okay, so we were dating. We'd only gone on a couple of dates, but I really, for obvious reasons, just knew. I really liked this girl, and so I spent pretty freely for being broke and having no money. And Alyssa said to me at one point, I really think that you shouldn't spend so much. You should save your money. And I'm like, oh, well, we're having fun and it's not that big of a deal. And, I might be broke, but I don't have many responsibilities either. She's like, well, you know, if you're saving that money, it could like buy diapers for your future children. And I was not thinking about the diapers for my future children when we were on our like second or third date, but it was so funny. You could be saving that money to buy diapers.
Are expensive.
Yeah, that's true. I just didn't think at that point I was saving already to pay for diapers.
Jackson has to go in a moment, but and then I'll wrap up the rest of what I wanted to share with you guys. But I thought before he'd go, we'd both compare notes as to what we were taught to look for in a future spouse. So that now that we are in the phase of 18 plus, we're in marriage territory, what we are on the hunt for. And I wrote down my list. I won't read all of it, but I would write down these lists constantly. I would write letters to my future husband. Dear future husband, I hope that you're a good priesthood holder. So before Jackson goes, what are the expectations for what men are looking for from women,
Sure.
and what women are looking for from men?
Well, she's got to be hot. Number one, table stakes. But also lots of talk about being a good mother. And by that, of course, it's meant she's going to teach the children about the church and about the gospel and how to live it. There was a lot about being a good wife, and that meant getting with the program and the pace that you were setting as the husband. I remember.
Would you say you talked about your future wife from, in your time in Young Men's, on your mission, from mission leaders? How often do you think the topic of what to look for is coming up?
I get the sense it was probably less explicit than what you had, honestly. Like, as a young man, it was part of the conversation for sure. And especially once you were on a mission, it really stepped up and became a lot more about like, taking lessons from the mission and applying it, or like from, righteous families that you saw and using that to find ideas for what you might want in a wife.
How much would you say you talked about your priesthood duties and your responsibility as a priesthood holder?
Far more.
Versus talking about okay.
Far more. Like, probably, yeah, far more. I mean, it came up, don't get me wrong, like regularly, like, but it was, I think that there was more of a focus on doing your duty as a priesthood holder and everything else falling into place for you as long as you're fulfilling your priesthood duty. And I do think that there's an element of a righteous woman being a reward. Mm-hmm. I don't think it was like, sometimes it probably was actually put that directly, right? That bluntly, but there certainly was this idea, and it was less about who. It was more kind of like, hey, whatever you're into, as long as she's righteous. But that this woman was going to be like a reward for a job well done as a priesthood holder.
Oh shit!
I mean, there were guys on the mission who would straight up talk about that. Like, there was one person I knew, for example, who had fallen in love with a local girl in my mission. Don't want to give him away, but he was, a high-ranking missionary, and quite a good one. And he used to talk at length about how this girl was going to be his reward from God for being a good missionary. And they got married. So, I guess he was a good missionary.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I think there was always a joke that the more chairs you could pick up as a man, when you're cleaning up after sacrament meeting, all the chairs get put away. And so the joke, and there's cartoons about this and memes and stuff, the more chairs you can carry, the more hot your wife will be. And then I
carried a lot of chairs, obviously.
Thank you. They also make that joke in Heretic where the girls are carrying their bike up the stairs, and the more stairs we go up, the hotter our husbands will be. So that this reward for being righteous is, even serving a mission. A mission is 2 years of unpaid labor. You pay to go. You are working from 6:30 a.m. till 9:30 at night or 10:30 at night. Essentially, that's when you're on the clock. You don't see your family the whole time in person. Unless you do that, unless you serve a mission as a man, You probably will not be able to date most of the Mormon girls in your ward when you get back home. So it really is, you have to put in your time if you want to participate within your cultural community and get married and continue onward, which is why a lot of people, if they come home early from their mission, they can become suicidal because the stakes of what it means to be a righteous return missionary, especially within dating, are very high. For me, what I learned about what I should look for from a husband, like I kind of already went over it a bit, the righteousness index, temple recommend holder, because to get a temple recommend, you have to answer a whole long list of questions about your righteousness. Hopefully you don't lie. I feel like it's a bit of a lax way to approach dating, because if you can lie to your bishop and get your temple recommend, then a lot of girls will date you. So current temple recommend, I would say I want him to have a testimony, to believe in the church, to be a priesthood holder, pay tithing. If you look at my list, almost every single thing of my non-negotiables list for my future husband all was to do with the church. There's almost nothing on that list that isn't just about being Mormon, which now is really sad, and I'm really glad it worked out, because I could have totally married a total dick with this list accidentally, but I think I was lucky that I also found someone that I was compatible with who also happened to check all the list, things off the list. But I do think that using that list, you can really end up with someone that you're completely not compatible with, because if you have a temple recommend, yep, we're good. Let's go on our date.
Take it from someone who's seen some of her very worthy exes. They were duds.
Duds, total duds.
Duds. Sorry, guys. I'm sure you're great.
All right, Jackson's gonna go. I'm gonna keep talking. Thank you for joining us.
Gotta go make money to buy diapers. All right. Love you.
Bye. Mwah. All right, just a few more things I wanted to share that we didn't get to in the conversation. One thing that we didn't talk about is how Mormon wards are organized once you're an adult. So a ward, like we said, is a congregation. When you turn 18, you get in something called a singles ward. And there's even a whole movie called The Singles Ward, all about what it's like to be in a singles ward. And it's basically the entire congregation is set so that you are encouraged to find people who are single so that you can date them and marry them. In my opinion, this creates this weird social dynamic where all the people in a congregation are just young, single adults who are all really looking to get married. And so there's a lot of focus within dating in the ward. I had a friend who had a bishop who specifically called her in to kind of lecture her and tell her that she was staying single for too long. She needed to start dating more seriously. She needed to focus more on dating and getting married rather than just being at the university for school, which is ridiculous. And so the purpose of singles wards is to hyper focus you on this dating dynamic. Once you get married, though, you get pulled out of that congregation and put into a married congregation with other married people, and with, then you'll maybe have some kids within the congregation because the married people will be having babies. And so in my opinion, it makes it so that when you are in a singles ward, you are almost culturally seen as less important. To get married is such a huge thing within Mormonism. So you're more babied in a singles ward. You're more, in my opinion, talked down to. Your social status is lower. So that makes it really difficult for people who get to be 25, 26, 27, who aren't married yet, because in their social status, they're still seen as important as an 18-year-old. They're still seen as almost babies. You're not a real adult till you're married. So I think this singles ward dynamic into a married ward dynamic also means that once your friends get married, you kind of just stop seeing them because they're pulled out of their community and thrust into a new ward, a new congregation. And there's this social divide between women and men who are single and women and men who are married. So often when my friends would get married, I would just kind of stop seeing them. Also at BYU, there's single housing and then there's married housing. So this process of getting married really removes you from your friend group and your social circle and your community, because you go from being in a singles ward and singles housing and you get ripped out and put into a married ward and married housing. And it just changes the dynamic. I would have experiences where friends would get married after me, and it was almost like we would become friends again because we could go on group dates and because we could hang out again as married women. And I found that to be a very strange dynamic that was very isolating, because in my opinion, you can really only be friends with people who are the same social status as you within the church. Even once you turn 18, there are still a ton of group dates you go on, which is kind of hilarious. At BYU, I would still be going on group dates constantly. There were social activities that were specifically said to be, this is a group date. And I would have guys ask me on dates, and it would be completely clear they had no romantic interest in me at all, but they just needed a date in order to go to this event. And so a lot of my experiences with dating were similar to my experiences with dancing at the stake dance, where it's almost just a social expectation that you are on a date in certain settings, or for men that you should be going on dates, a few times a week. That's kind of a social expectation. And so a lot of the dates have nothing to do with romantic interest. It's just a social expectation that you should be dating. And the dynamic of girls getting asked on dates was also really cruel, in my opinion. We mentioned the sweet spirit thing already. Within one of my apartments, there were 6 girls, and there was a semester where one of the girls didn't get asked on a date the entire semester. Me, I got asked on dates maybe once or twice a week, and then one of our roommates would get asked on dates multiple times in a day. So she would sometimes have a breakfast late date, a lunch date, and a dinner date in the same day. And she's an example of somebody, I don't think she would wear a wedding ring, but some girls they'd just be so beautiful. It's when you're just asking people on dates randomly, it really is just about the way the girl looks. So some girls would be so pretty that is why they would wear the ring, so that they could just not get asked on dates constantly, because it does end up taking up quite a bit of your time to be asked on these very casual, it's not like these guys often are asking these pretty girls for, let's date seriously. They're getting asked on these, hey, I have to have a date for a social engagement. You're pretty. Why not come with me on a date? The dating for women can end up, it just creates a very strange dynamic, in my opinion, to have at a college. I would sometimes be studying in the library, and people would say, do you want to go on a date with me? And I might have been flattered had it been like something where they were, wow, you're so beautiful. I really want to get to know you for real. But instead it was usually like, hey, I have a ward activity tonight. Will you come with me? Because I don't want to be seen as a loser for being totally alone. And you're just almost a little gadget for him to bring so that he can still be seen as, important, essentially. So a lot of the dates, you might think it would be flattering to get asked on dates, but it really just felt like often I was just a little pawn in their game of proving that they were, important enough or cool enough to always have a date. Tinder did come on the scene when I was at BYU, which was pretty funny. And at the time it was used as a NICMO hookup app, which I thought was so funny that Mormonism doesn't have true hookups. It's just, there's a lot of cuddle parties, there's a lot of makeout sessions. That's what they're engaged in whenever they do their Tinder dating. It's just, in my experience at least, I'm sure there is some real hookups that happen, but for my friends, they were just using it as, casual dating and making out. For the final portion of the video, I wanted to jump into a bit of what it looks like to date in Mormon culture when you are not the perfect, fit the stereotype of what people are looking for out of dating. We've talked about how to conform to Mormon dating culture, you essentially have to have a temple recommend. You should typically be thin, white. I did my expectations, beauty expectations / plastic surgery video that is right here if you want to check that out. We talked a lot about the expectations for physicality for women in that video. But there's this whole, as we've been laying out here as well, list of what it takes to fit in Mormon dating culture. And unfortunately and cruelly, a lot of people fall outside of that norm and that doctrinal expectation for what a human should be in order to be worthwhile to date. And so this last portion, I'm going to share a little bit about some different experiences and what people have shared of what it's like to date outside of this societal expectation. One of the most difficult aspects that I think people face is if they are not straight. This is something that I've talked about a lot in other videos too. If you've seen My Husband's Not Gay, I reacted to that video, and it's about how gay men essentially choose to marry women and even procreate with them so that they can still walk on the gospel path and not get kicked out of the church, because within the church, acting on homosexual attraction is considered to be a sin. So I also have the For the Strength of Youth guidelines. This is guidelines for youth, and this is the section where they talk about homosexual attraction. So in the 2011 version, which is the one I grew up with, it says homosexual and lesbian behavior is a serious sin. If you find yourself struggling with same-gender attraction, or if you are being persuaded to participate in inappropriate behavior, seek counsel from your parents and your bishop. They will help you. So in my version of For the Strength of Youth, it just says it's a serious sin. The updated version says, it's phrased as a question. It says, I am attracted to people of my same sex. How do these standards apply to me? Standards being the law of chastity. It says, feeling same-sex attraction is not a sin. If you have these feelings and do not pursue or act on them, you are living Heavenly Father's sacred law of chastity. You are a beloved child of God and a disciple of Jesus Christ. Remember that the Savior understands everything you're going through. So obviously, like I said, it is much softer. It's very interesting how they skirt around this question of if being gay is a sin, which within Mormonism, they're specific enough to say having the feelings is not the sin, acting on the feelings is a sin. So in the 2011 version, it says, the behavior is a serious sin. In the 2022 version, it says, feeling same-sex attraction is not a sin. So they didn't actually come out and say the behavior is not a sin. They're just saying the attraction is not a sin. So it is a way to be kinder in their language, but they're still not walking back the claim that being gay and acting on being gay, here they're separating feeling and behavior in how they're describing or defining sin. But in my opinion, it's still just as cruel, because essentially they're saying that if you're gay, if you have same-sex attraction, you are expected to be celibate for your whole life. And for a teenager, you might look around and think, my heterosexual friends are also being asked to live the law of chastity, so we're all the same, right? But this is still cruel because the heterosexual teenagers get to, have this looking forward to dating, marriage, children, family. They're asked to live the law of chastity with the promise that someday within marriage, they can have sex. However, for a person with same-sex attraction, they either can, like we see in My Husband's Not Gay, get married and be in a heterosexual relationship and feel unhappy and unsatisfied and unfulfilled, or they can live a life of celibacy. And so I think anyone who's growing up in the Mormon church experiencing and realizing, well, I'm gay, they're going to have to either shove those feelings down, they're going to have to try to, I've heard so many stories of people try to pray the gay away. The church has also engaged in conversion therapy tactics over the years. And so to me, that is one of the most difficult aspects of Mormon dating culture is everything we just discussed is very much in your face as a gay person or a member of the LGBTQ community. And yet you are not going to be partaking in this culture in the same way as your heterosexual peers. So I think that is definitely very, very cruel, and I think it's why this Wikipedia page exists. I also found a lot of threads on Reddit of people sharing what it's like for them to be in Mormon dating culture but not fit the mold. This person said, at BYU and afterward, I felt like so much of dating felt like a beauty pageant. You needed to appear spiritual but not Molly Mormon, pretty but not immodest, and all in pursuit of some guy in the ward. I felt like I had to have the perfect resume. And then this other person says, dating was awful. I was once told that I might be cute enough for a dinner if I lost 10 pounds. And so obviously, as I shared with my roommates, so much of dating, when you're just going on dates based off of how people look. It's all just a game of, you know, who can be the prettiest. And the power really is all in the guy's hands to say, who am I going to ask out? And it's really a power imbalance, because it means the girl is always being pursued and never being the pursuer. So you really don't have a lot of power necessarily to be choosing who you date as a Mormon woman. You accept being pursued, and you might, you know, flirt a little bit, but the question of who gets asked, who does the asking, the cultural expectation is that the man does the asking. And so it really puts the ball in someone else's court in who you even can go on dates with, because as a woman you're expected to be asked and not to ask. This dynamic just means that the prettiest people get to go on dates, and if you are not as pretty, the other things about you are less valued in this culture. And that means that it's, you know, this person also said in their comment that they started dating non-members and they've never looked back, probably because in a more typical dating setting, I'm sure looks obviously do still matter, but it's probably seen, I would hope, as one of many things you could look at as to compatibility, and not the one thing you are focused on when it comes to asking someone to date you. I also found this YouTube account, which I watched some of their videos, and it doesn't look like they're still posting, but I thought it was an interesting look into what it's like to be Black and dating in Utah and dating Mormons. I watched some of those videos, and they talk pretty candidly about it. So if you wanted to watch those videos to get a picture as to what it's like to date as a non-white person, I think one common dynamic, which I always found to be very odd, was that if a guy serves his mission in a foreign country where the women are of a different ethnicity, then when he comes back from his mission, he will often pursue women of that ethnicity and try to marry them. So it was not uncommon to see a Utah white boy go to, you know, some foreign country and then come back and try to find a girl of that, you know, ethnicity to try to date him, which always felt like a really odd dynamic to me. I also think that, you know, in the church, there is a very long history of racism. Brigham Young said that interracial marriage should be punished by death. And many other Mormon leaders after him heavily discouraged interracial marriage. And so I think that that also has an impact on what it's like to date as a person of color in Utah, because it just means that there's a lot more of a stigma around dating outside of your race. Even though it's not taught from the pulpit anymore, it does still impact how people choose who they want their partner to be. I also saw some comments that were basically like men telling women of color that only white girls were their type, which I suppose, you know, if that's your type, then you don't need to be so rude as to tell the girl that that's the case. Then it just is racist and you're just being really rude. No need to tell that to someone's face. If you don't want to date them, then maybe just don't bring it up and be a dick. The comment that I saw said, after talking to my friend about my struggles with dating, it made me realize that women of color in Utah are greatly unappreciated because men who aren't used to diversity will choose a blonde white girl over one who is more ethnic and out of their whitewashed comfort zone. So many times in my life, I was told that I wasn't someone's type, or that they flat out weren't into ethnic girls. This is such a poisonous mindset to have, especially if you are ruling out whole races and calling it your type. So there's a lot of similar comments that I found on different threads with that same spirit in mind, which is that because girls don't have a lot of control over who they're dating, they are just subject to whatever the guys decide they're into. In this video from this YouTube channel, one of the women talked about even she dated a Black guy who was Mormon, because they're like, there are Black people who are Mormon, and it is kind of surprising, but there definitely are. And she shares, she just shared what it was like even as a Black woman who wasn't a member of the church to date a Black guy who was a Mormon. And I found that to be a really interesting conversation. So definitely check out that YouTube channel. I'll drop some of the threads I've been screenshotting below so you can look through as well. I think Mormon culture is so focused on conformity that it means that if you don't fit the exact structure of what you're supposed to be like and look like, and spirituality and tithing and your calling and how much money you have and how much your family has, it's just a very isolating culture to try to find connection in. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm glad Jackson could hop in and share a little bit of his personal experiences. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions for the two of us, please feel free to drop them below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and as always, I will see you all next week.